Hello and happy July 1. Welcome to month 2 of the Wheelhouse Medallion Quilt. This month we have kind of two main goals. One is to cut some border triangles. Up here, we're just going to be cutting half of the border triangles, really, this lighter fabric out here from the Sinister Gathering in that purpley lilac-y colorway. We're saving that cutting for another month. And then the other thing that we're doing is we're creating half of some of these blocks. So you'll notice that this whole block here kind of creates a wheel, hence the Wheelhouse title. But this month we're going to be focusing on the inside section of those, just on this sort of pink and yellow side, and we're going to be creating quarter blocks, okay? So we're going to be creating these two here and these two here, and then same on opposite sides. So we're not doing these corners yet. We're just doing the quarter blocks on the inside of the side edges, okay? And let me show you all the beautiful fabrics that we're going to be making these from. Really just from three main fabrics. The Sinister Swarm in the powder color, the Honeycomb in the sunset color, and then also we're going to be using the piecework in the rose colorway. And those are the only fabrics that we're going to use this month. But we are going to be using, you might remember that we cut some of these small triangles from the Sinister Gathering in the other color from last month. So you can get those back out now. We finally have something to do with them. Let me go through a little bit of the cutting of the Sinister fabric first. So we're going to be, again, cutting it in a few different ways. Last month we fussy cut some of it. This month, we're really not fussy cutting any of the Sinister Gathering. One of the first things that we're gonna do is, again, the border triangle. And once we cut them, we're just gonna reserve them for month 5, okay? I'm not telling you anything that your instructions doesn't already tell you. It's just fun to chat about it. So the border triangle are these guys, and I did not cut them specifically or fussy in any way, okay? A way to make it easier though, instead of just taking this small triangle and flipping it back and forth and cutting across your yardage, it's best to subcut the fabric first. And by subcut, I mean go ahead and cut strips that are the height of these triangles. And your instructions will tell you to subcut at 4 5/8. So that's how thick this is. And then the full width of fabric. You need to cut 6 of those. And then that'll give you enough fabric to cut a total of 36. So we can get 6 of these border triangles across the width by continuing to flip back and forth like this. We can get 6 across 6, so that's gonna make a total of 36. And I think layering up 3 at a time is perfectly fine. Just make sure all your edges of your subcut strips are nice and packed close together so that your cutting is accurate, okay? So that's how we're gonna do that. And then you can see on the diagram here that just like last month when we cut these small triangles out of that sort of thicket and floral area, not any moths, but just through this area, we're asking you to do that again this month. We're gonna cut 12 on the right side. That means that the letters of that template are facing you, and then we're gonna cut 12 on the reverse side. That means that you can't see the letters of the template anymore, okay? And that's what these are, all right? And then the only other thing to cut from the Sinister Gathering this month are just some little squares that are 4.5 by 4.5. We're gonna cut 4 of those, and that's just actually gonna be those very far corners in the border of the quilt. So again, you'll also reserve that for month 5. Now, the next fabric that we're gonna use is this Honeycomb and Sunset, and you don't have to worry about any fussy cutting with this one. I can show you again on the diagram here that you sort of can line these up in little pairs next to each other. You're gonna need to cut 20 on the right side of the template and then 20 with it on the reverse side. There is plenty of this fabric so that if you wanted to fold it up and every time that you cut one, you'll be cutting the regular piece and then the reverse piece, you could probably work out your own logic of how to cut and still save plenty of fabric, or you can just use this exact guide here. One thing that you do wanna be sure of when you cut this is there's one edge of this template that the instructions will advise you. It's this edge here. It says place on lengthwise grain. This is the lengthwise grain here that runs alongside the selvage. You do want that to be placed like this, okay? So that's why it has it in little pairs. You'll be cutting one here, and once you have that cut here, you'll be putting the second one here, okay? And the reason for that is so that when this piece is right here, that allows you to have grain on the outer edge of your block, okay? So that when you go to assemble your blocks together, you'll have some straight grain there to sew them together, which is a bonus. It helps prevent a little bit of warping when you're putting blocks together, okay? And one tip to make sure that you've got everything cut like half one side and half reverse is just make sure that when you've got 20 and 20, when you put them next to each other with the right sides facing you, that they are a mirror image of one another, right? And that's gonna be the same for just about all the pieces that we cut for this quilt. Okay, and then the next fabric that we're gonna cut is this piecework in the rose colorway. We are gonna be cutting this large triangle. And we're gonna be cutting a total of, I believe it is 32, because we're gonna cut them in 2 different ways, okay? So 16 of them are gonna be cut with the flower. Generally, if we have this whole triangle here, the flower is generally sort of in the center. I've kind of got a black dot right there, sort of where I marked the center. And depending on what type of template you're using, you'll have more or less availability to see the design of the fabric through it. But 16 of them are going to be cut so that this flower is kind of floating in the center here, so we see the whole flower, okay? 8 of those will be on the right side and 8 of those will be on the reverse side because they kind of come opposite together in pairs, all right? And you can see how this flower is sort of floating out there with a little background around it. However, in the other half of these shapes, we're going to be cutting 16 where we've positioned the flower closer down towards the center, closer down towards here, okay? So you can see the difference between how this is kind of packed in and this is sort of spread out. That just gives a little subtle design variation, which makes the quilt a little bit interesting and not too stagnant. But just pay careful attention to your instructions, and it gives you really good guidance on exactly how to float all those little triangles along there so that 8 are in the center going one way and the same way but on the reverse, and then the same for a flower that's lower down on that triangle, 8 on one side and 8 on the reverse. And let me show you the logic of how the quarter blocks are going to come together this month, okay? The total number that you're going to need of all these blocks, of these quarters, is 16, and these are the 4 different varieties that we have here. So this is one variety where the flower is sort of floating a little lower down in the triangle, okay? And see they're mirrors, they're a mirror image of each other. And the same for this piece and this piece, excuse me. But the powder colorway of this one, and then I can't remember that colorway. What is Spring. It? Spring. Thanks, Elizabeth, behind the camera. The spring colorway is on the other side here, okay? So you do 4 exactly like this, and then you do another 4 where the flowers are still cut lower down here on the triangle, but the position of the powder and the spring swap, okay? That seems a little confusing, but again, just trust your directions as you go, that you need 4 lower flowers with spring and powder this way, and then the spring and powder just swap this way, but otherwise the block is the same. And the same really then happens with the version where the flowers are kind of floating up more towards the center of that triangle, where the powder spring are alternating each other like this, and then up here they swap, okay? And that logic starts playing into the design of the quilt in order to build out these little corners just like this, so that this green from the Sinister Gathering can kind of continue, okay? In terms of piecing these, it's pretty straightforward piecing. I will say that if you just go ahead and tell yourself that every right side set of small triangle, triangle center, and large triangle, that kind of creates one unit, okay? You create those units before you create these. If you just tell yourself that the right side get pressed one way, these seams, and the reverse side get pressed that way, that's gonna allow you to nestle your seams together well here, so that you have these seams being pressed in that direction and these being pressed in that direction, and that allows a smooth join. I've decided to just press these long diagonal seams open. There are lots of different methods to pressing so that once you join all these and you have all these seams coming in towards the center, that they can nestle and lay in. There's lots of methods for getting all 8 of those seams together where you can stop short of going all the way to the end and then sort of open them and splay them out. So you can research that if you like. I kind of do the most obvious thing when it comes to putting patchwork together. I sort of alternate my seams where it makes sense, and then sometimes I lay them open where I feel like that's going to let things lie flat without a lot of fussing and flitting about with all the little nooks and crannies of the seams. I also think that often when you go to put together a whole block and you have lots of seams coming in towards the center, I think the block sort of tells you what direction it wants to be pressed. It's sort of like it'll kind of already be headed that direction as you lay it out on the ironing board, and working with it to kind of let it guide you is, I think, a pretty good rule of thumb. The other beautiful thing about this quilt that is very forgiving is just when you think that you're gonna have to worry about how all those seams come together, you don't, because all that intersection that happens right there gets covered up by an applique circle. So you're welcome. So yeah, this month is the first time we're really doing very specific fussy cutting. We're doing some specific cutting in the thicket, and then we're doing really specific cutting with these flowers, but I promise it's totally worth it. And you are going to begin ending up with lovely things like this. And in just a few days, I'm gonna be sharing some show and tell of the beautiful projects that our friends at Pennington Quilt have made with all the leftovers. We really want you to save all these bits and pieces that you have left over, and these quilter's lace or Swiss cheese or whatever you want to call it. Save it towards the end so that you're sure to get everything that you need for the quilt cut out first. But there's lots to look forward to in your leftovers. So happy month 2 and happy sewing.